Welcome to the War Academy channel. As we have already seen in other programs, the German Tiger-type combat tank entered combat for the first time during the end of 1942, continuing to increase its number throughout the year of 1943. The way in which they were used was in heavy panzer battalions, each composed of about 45 Tigers, and another series of lighter support armor. In the words of many of the men who manned these new battle tanks, it was the first time since the war against the Soviet Union had begun that the Germans could fight the Soviet T-34s with superiority. Recall that to date, German armor was inferior to that of the Red Army, and the arrival of these new heavy panzers was a relief to the troops. In any case, their low number only allowed their presence in very specific places on the combat front. In today's show, we are going to see how the Soviet reaction was when they had to face the Tigers, and what were the most common tactics they used against them. The first thing we need to know is that, paradoxical as it may seem, the Soviets managed to capture, practically intact, one of the first Tigers that the Germans put on the battlefield. Although the strict orders when a new armament is released is that it cannot fall into the hands of the enemy under any circumstances, the Soviets were fortunate to capture a Tiger at the beginning of 1943. This German panzer, belonging to the Heavy Panzer Battalion 502, was trapped in a ditch in the Leningrad sector, from which he was finally unable to get out, and as Soviet troops approached, the crew abandoned the Tiger and withdrew. The Soviets quickly seized the German armor, sending it to Moscow for further study. Its impact was so important that even Stalin himself went to see it. The problem for the Germans was that at that early date, the Soviets had already discovered all the secrets about their new vehicle. The main advantages they had were their strong armor, which made them very difficult to shoot down at long ranges, and their powerful cannon, which likewise allowed the Germans to destroy Soviet tanks at a much greater range than they themselves could. As the Germans deployed more battalions of Tigers on the Eastern Front, the Soviets, although they did not fear it, nor did they flee the battlefield when they saw a group of Tigers, they did learn to respect it and take precautions. It is possible that one of the most significant actions, on this respect that the Tiger instilled on the battlefield, mainly during the year of 1943, and the beginning of 1944, was in the Battle of Prokhorovka, in which the Soviets launched their armored en masse against the 100 suspected German Tigers in the area. This led them to make many mistakes and pay dearly for their valuation of the Tiger. It would be throughout 1944, when the Soviets were deploying new weapons on the battlefield, which would end up taking away from the Germans the advantage they had enjoyed during the previous year. Having seen this first point, let us now see how the Soviets used to deal with these armored vehicles. The first thing we have to take into account, and as we have already said, is that the Germans never had a significant number of operational Tigers on the Eastern Front, so in itself, and in general terms, they were not a constant problem. Once a Tiger battalion appeared, either on the defensive or on the offensive, all kinds of projectiles were launched at them, whether they were from artillery, or from other battle tanks or tank destroyers such as the Su-100 or the Su-152. And it is so, they might not get a direct hit on the Tigers, or they might not get through their armor, but many times one of these hits was more than enough to put them out of action. There are records, in which some German Tigers received between 100 and 200 impacts of all kinds, after a combat against the Soviets, and although none had penetrated it, many times it could be left in repair for a season. In addition to firing all kinds of ground shells at them, aircraft could also join in the action, dropping all kinds of shells and bombs on them. But without a doubt, the most striking tactic is the one that we are going to see next, this one being based precisely on one of the weakest points of the Tiger. And it is that, although the Tiger was designed as a breakthrough armor, whose function was to break through the enemy defenses, to later stop, while other lighter German armor entered the enemy rear, the circumstances of the moment forced him to adopt other function. And it was precisely in this new task as a firefighter, in which he was sent to the most critical places on the front, that his main problem worsened. The Tiger tank was not designed to travel long distances, and to be continuously going from one place to another, and due to this, the mechanical problems that it already had increased, as it had to be always on the move. To take advantage of this, the Soviets would attack from a sector, and if they saw that the Germans were sending one of these battalions into the area, they could perfectly fall back, change the direction of their attack, or directly start attacking from another point, to force the Tigers to move back to that sector. If we add this to the great deception that the Soviets were already carrying out, many times these heavy battalions were lost from one place to another. This strategy that we are talking about had its best example during Operation Bagration. Let's see next the main reasons why the German Tigers caused casualties throughout the conflict. Of the total of 1,350 battle tanks produced, it is estimated that 41% had to be destroyed by their own crews, after a mechanical failure, or after being disabled by an enemy shot, and not being able to withdraw it. In addition, 14% were also discharged for unknown reasons. This tells us that only approximately 608 Tigers, out of the total of 1,350, caused a casualty due to a direct enemy hit. Given this, we have to say that as a general rule, the order given to the Soviet tank brigades was that the Tigers had to be destroyed whenever they could, using this type of indirect techniques, in which the exposure of the Soviet units is minor. This does not mean, of course, that hundreds of direct clashes did not take place, in which the losses of both sides were very high, but in no case, and as the experts in the matter provide, can Tigerphobia be spoken of as such on the Eastern Front. Finally, another anecdote that we want to highlight is that on many occasions, the Germans were victims of their own war propaganda, to a greater extent than the Allies. Although they were told that the Tigers, both in their Model 1 and Model 2, were indestructible, this led them to commit many recklessness that ended up leading to their death. There are numerous reports of German officers complaining that these units were launched on suicide missions, in order to carry out operations that were impossible. It must be remembered that in most cases, the worst enemy of a battle tank is not another armored vehicle, but rather the infantry itself, which, approaching in large numbers and being camouflaged, can shoot down the armored vehicle using smaller weapons. One of the best examples of this confidence that the Germans came to have in these heavy tanks, which made them believe they were invincible, could be precisely the death of Michael Wittmann himself, when he launched himself with half a dozen armored vehicles against hundreds of Allied tanks. However, actions like his in Villers-Bocage were the ones that most fed this myth about the Tiger, which at one point did instill that call Tigerphobia in the Western Allies, although due to its great air superiority, and also terrestrial, it was not too difficult for them to overcome this obstacle. Well, so far this program, in which we have analyzed this curious aspect of war. If you want to expand this information, I leave you in the description the program in which we analyze the two most powerful heavy panzer battalions. I sure hope you'll love it. Many thanks to everyone, especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.